Okay, so this is a sew along this month. We do a sew along every month, monthly make at New Forest Sewing Studio here. So this is a sew along for the Isla Trench Coat, which will cover the main. It won't cover every single piece because it's quite an involved make, but it will cover the more complex elements of the coat to put together. Okay, so that's the named patterns Isla Trench Coat. So I thought I'd show it on my mannequin and then I'll put some photos of me wearing it at the end of the video. So it's a double-breasted coat with a, I've done the belt up with a tie belt. So double-breasted coat with a tie belt. It has a cape function, cape front and around the back. It has a bent pleat at the back, a two-piece collar, and a collar strap around here like so, so you can do that up as well. So that's a really nice design feature. As I say, it has the pattern piece and everything to make the belt as well. It has Welt pockets and is fully lined throughout, and the sleeves have a sleeve strap as well with a button closure there. So yeah, it's a really nice jacket. So the main elements I've gone through are the welt pockets and the sleeve tabs and the collar construction, because that probably is the most complex part, is the collar construction and the collar strap, and the getting the hem right to turn up to make the hem. So yeah, so that's the jacket, so the coat rather. So I think I'll get a lot of wear out of that, and I'll get some photos and put them at the end of the video. So I hope you enjoy the video and it helps you with your sewing if you want to make the Isla Trench Coat by named patterns. Thank you. Okay, so having cut out all your pieces, you're going to make sure all your markings are on there and that you've interfaced all your pieces and then your edges along there, so it's all clearly marked in there. Then the next thing you're going to do is sew your dart, which I've done, and then it does tell you to serge several of the edges, which is detailed in there. And the next bit is to start doing the welt pockets, so I'll show you that in some more detail. So sewing the welt pockets, you'll have one interfaced welt pocket piece and one non-interfaced. Okay, so you're going to sew each of those together. So it says on your pattern, your seam allowance, so it's an 8mm seam allowance, so it's an unusual seam allowance, and you're going to sew around the edge there, and then you're going to grade your seam, so trim one down, trim one of your seam edges down, and then clip into the curves there. Turn it in the right way, as I've done there, and then we're going to top stitch 2 rows around there, one close to the edge, and then one 8mm in from that. Okay, I might not quite do 8mm, I'll see, but yeah, so I'm going to top stitch those next, and then we're going to start attaching those to the welt markings on the front of the coat. Okay, so that's your welt piece made. So next we want to line it up on the coat. So you're going to line it, this edge has to be along the drawn edge at the centre of your welt, and then the outside edges are going to join up with the tailor's tacks, which are to the points. I have to mend mine, I have to adjust the length, but you're going to, the edge of the, you'll have marked that centre line in there, and then the pocket pasting is going to, the edge of it is going to sit along there and then line up with these 2 patches you've marked there. So as I say, I've got one there, one there, and one there, and then one there, one there, and one there. so like in a little triangle at the end. So you want your unsewn edge of the welt to lie along that centre front piece, but these edges to line up with these notches there. So I'm going to pin that in place, and then it wants you to stitch it along at an 8mm seam allowance along that edge there. All right, so I'll do that. You're going to put it on with the interfaced side up, so that's the side that you've top stitched, because then that folds back and back like that later on. Okay, so we're going to stitch that on there with an 8mm seam allowance, and then we attach the other piece up here. So I'll show you that next. Okay. Okay, so let's show you this one. Okay, so next we need the welt facing, okay, which is a piece you'll have interfaced, and it wants you to serge or neaten all your edges, okay, and then one of the edges you will have some notches in, so I tend to just mark mine in chalk before I serge around the edges, before I overlock around the edges. Okay, so then that piece is going to sit like so along there. Okay, and one edge, yeah. So one edge is slightly shaped, and on the diagram it looks like that is at the lower edge of the pocket, so that is the right way round. And basically you're going to want to line that edge up with your centre front line, so that those two are together. Okay, so your notch there and your notch there will line up with the outer edges of your welt just about, and then this edge will line up with that centre front, with that line that you've got marked on there, so it just butts up to that piece there. So I'm going to pin that in place like so. Pin it back to front. Okay, so as long as that's nicely meeting in the edge there, that's fine, and those edges line up. So we're going to stitch an 8mm seam allowance from there to there. All right, so from that notch to that notch. All right, and do that on both of those, and then we're going to snip, cut through, and turn that facing to the inside. Okay, next. Okay, so that's our welt pocket stitched on. So now we're going to cut through, like we have on this one. So try and do it on camera so I can show you. So you want to cut through the centre bit there. The easiest way I find is to just give it a fold, get a centre snip. And you can literally cut down the centre there. And you will see your markings underneath. You should see some markings underneath. And you'll get to the point where you've got that triangular bit, and then you need to carefully cut to the edge there. Let's get that a bit nearer so I can see what I'm doing. Difficult when you're trying to show it on camera. I'll show you in a minute when I've done it. So you're literally going to cut into the corners like that. So you're making a little V piece there. Okay, hopefully you can see that. I'll do the same thing on the other corner. It's easiest just to turn it round. Cut down that centre. And come to your marked V. Up to but not through your stitching, but you have got to get quite close, otherwise you'll get puckers in it if you don't get really close to it, so it is tricky. Just be brave. Okay, so then this piece folds underneath, folds through, those ends tuck through, and then you're going to give that a press. And we want to press it so that the seam allowance is facing that way. So I've done that on this one. I've done that on that one. So you're just going to press the seam allowance towards this side so that that sits flat on that side, and you've got a nice seam there. And then we're going to understitch down that edge along there. Okay, and then we're going to turn these corners in a minute. Okay, so I'll go and do that next. Okay, so I've understitched along there, okay, and then you're going to want to turn these little corners under, okay, like that, to the wrong side, give it a press, and then that wants to turn under through there and give that a press. Okay, so then you'll end up with your seam allowance pressed towards that part of the jacket, okay, like so. And then you're going to want to attach you're going to want to overlock around the edges of your inner pocket. So you've got two pocket pieces, you've got an inner pocket and an outer pocket, and then you're going to want to join that right sides together along that welt edge there to attach those. Okay, so I'm going to go and stitch those. Does it say the seam? So the welt facing, it says, has an 8mm seam allowance. I presume that's along that edge as well. Okay, so like we have been doing, an 8mm seam allowance along there. Okay, just stitch that together. Okay, and then we're going to press the seam allowance towards the pocket bags, and the seam allowance will press down towards the pocket bag. Okay, so I'll go and do that, and then we're going to attach the other pocket bag to this, I think. Okay, so I've sewn that and understitched it along there, but I've actually just realised I should have done the outer pocket bag first, but that's not a problem, we can still do that. So the outer pot, ideally you should do this first. So the outer pocket bag you want to sew to the seam allowance of the welt pocket. So this is the seam allowance of your welt piece here. Okay, so you want to sew your outer pocket bag to that seam allowance. So I'm just going to pin that there and show you a bit better, hopefully. So you're not stitching it to the coat, you're just stitching it to the seam allowance. So let me clean that a bit better and I can show you. Hold on, I can show you. Oh, the lining wants to do everywhere. The pocket bag. Right, okay, so you literally are going to sew it just to that seam allowance. Alright, that's what you're going to attach it to. Okay, and then we're going to press the seam allowance towards the pocket bag. Okay, and then having done the other ones, I think we then join them together. Okay, so I'll go and sew those outer ones, but ideally it says to do those first, but it doesn't really matter which way round you do it, to be honest. So that's fine. I will go and sew those and do the other one as well. Okay. Okay, so the voice is going today. So that's that one attached to there. Okay, and I've pressed that way. So then you just need to join your two pocket bags together. Lining those edges. My lining is stretched out a little bit, but I think it will just wiggle back into place. Just attach those around there, round to there. And you're just going to stitch around, seam around your pocket bag piece, and then it doesn't say so, but I prefer to stitch the little welt corners down. It's how I would have normally done a welt pocket. I know you're going to stitch the flap over in a minute, but I would still prefer to stitch the little welts down. So in a minute I'm going to just fold that back and stitch the welt down to this piece here, to the pocket bit there, to hold that in place. So I'll show you when I've done all that. Okay, so I've stitched around the pocket bag. Okay, so attach those together, and then I did stitch down the little triangle bits from the welt. So it's just what I've done with other welts. So you just fold that triangle out over onto the pocket edge and stitch it down. You can use a zipper foot or whatever just to get close into the edge there if you want, but I just did it with normal foot, that's fine. And then it just helps to secure that welt piece there. Okay, so then it wants you to just, I'll give that a press first to make sure that's all set right. And then it wants you to stitch, I've done this one ready, press this one ready. So it wants you to stitch along here just to secure this in place. Okay, so 3 centimeters, so I've just marked a chalk mark along there, and then we're going to fold that over, and then we're going to hand stitch those 2 edges together along there. Okay, to make, and then that's your pocket. Okay, so I'm gonna finish those, and then I think the next bit is to sew the centre back seam, attach the side seams, and then I'll show how we sew the cape together. Okay. Okay, so I've sewed up the side seams and the back seam and everything of the coat. So next it says to do the cape. So you're going to get your both your lining pieces and your outer pieces, main pieces of fabric of your piece 4 and piece 3. Okay, and you're basically going to join them at the side seams, so down these side seams there. Okay, so I've done that on that one. So you have that's my lining. Okay, this is the right side, and then that's the outer piece. Okay, and then you're just going to put right sides together. Oops, my lining's a bit alive. There we go. Right sides together. I'm going to pin that up there just to hold it in place. Not that we're not stitching up there. I just want to hold that in place for a minute. Right. So then what it wants us to do is stitch right around this lower edge. So just make sure you've got your seam allowances together there. Put your side seams. And the same again with that side there. Squeaky shoes. So if you can hear sawing, that's my husband outside. Right. Just make sure, so it's right sides together. Just going to pin all the way around there. Ooh. Be all right, I think. It's not quite right. The lining's a bit mobile. Do that again. quite wriggly. Sort that bit out in a minute. Pin that way. Trim that down. It's obviously shifted a bit when I've cut it or stretched it out. Right. So let's just leave that like that. So we're going to pin that all the way around. Basically we're going to stitch from here, just where the corner of the neckline piece is there, okay, all the way around that outer edge, okay, and then we'll snip the corners to turn it out, and then we're going to top stitch around. Okay, so I'll show you when I've stitched around there, then we'll snip the corners and turn it out. Okay, so we've attached the lining, the cape lining, to the outer cape piece, and it doesn't tell you to, but I've decided to understitch my lining to the seam allowance. I couldn't get around the curve bit there, but the rest of it I've decided to understitch around, just because when I know we're going to top stitch it, but just when I press that over, it'll help keep that lining nicely turned to the inside, ready to top stitch it. So now we just, having stitched that, we just need to press that all over to the inside, and then we're going to top stitch 2 rows of top stitching, I think, around, yep, cape edge twice, yes. So then we're going to top stitch that around, all the way around twice. I'm going to press that all over first, over to the right way. I've clipped the corners before I understitched it, yeah, and then we're just going to press that round and top stitch it. Okay, so I'll do that and then show you that. Okay, so that's the oh, excuse me, croaky throat. That's the cape bit all sewn together. Okay, sewn together, turned in the right way, and then top stitched around that edge. Okay, then it does say to then it says just to attach it to the main part of the coat, like I have, and then baste it all together. But I did decide to, just in a long stitch, baste around all the edges first, just because my lining's quite slippery, and I didn't want to, I wanted to keep those edges together. So I did baste all around the top, right around there, as it tells you to do to the coat, but I decided to do that first and then attach it to the coat. So I've attached that part already, so I'm just going to finish attaching round there, and then I'm going to need to sew, just base stitch all that together to the coat, to attach all that together, and then I'm going to overlock these shoulder edges and sew the shoulders together. Okay, and then we're going to go on to making the collar and the collar stand, etc. Okay, so I'll do that first. Okay, so now we'll make the collar. So you've got a top collar and an under collar, several other pieces, collar stand, etc., and the collar strap and the strap loop. But at the moment we'll attach the make the collar piece. So you've got a top collar, which you should have interfaced, and an under collar, which is not interfaced. Move those over there. So you're going to put those, just stitch those right sides together like that. So you will find that your under collar is slightly smaller than your top collar, but that's on purpose. So you're just going to join the edges together and pin around those edges, stitch around there. So just stitch around all that outer edge, and then we're going to clip into the curves, turn it all in the right way, press it, and then top stitch. Oh, excuse me. And then top stitch, is really hot here today. Top stitch, 2 rows of top stitching around the outside. So I'll show you when I've done all that, and then we'll get on to the more unusual items of the strap loop and the stand and the strap for the collar and how that's put together. Okay, so that's the collar sewn. Okay, and then I've top stitched around that edge, and it doesn't tell you to, but I've also made sure those edges are aligned, and I've just done a long basting stitch around that edge, just because it helps to hold those 2 layers together when you insert them inside the collar stand. So next it wants you to do the strap loops, the strap loops that go on for the collar. So it wants you to overlock one long edge, and then just fold the overlocked, the unneatened edge in first, and then the overlocked edged over, like you would do a belt loop really for jeans. So then it wants you to just top stitch down each side of those. So I'll do that, and then we're going to attach them to the inner collar stand. Okay, so I'm going to go through the attaching the collar stand. So I've sewn this once and sewn it wrong, so you'll notice that my collar does have notched edges, but I think I'll get away with that, as I've had to unpick it. So belt loop, the what do they call them? The strap loops, piece 13 here. So then it wants you to cut it into 5 pieces. So mine measured 40 centimetres long, so I'm going to cut that into 5 8-centimetre pieces. So one, I've marked it on there already. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So then we're going to put 2 aside, and then we want to work with these 3. So what we want to do is to put them onto the outer collar stand, the back side of the loop against the right side of the collar stand. Yeah, so that's 3 of those. So what it wants you to do is you've got your outer collar stand, which is piece 9, this one here, okay, and it's got marked on, you want to have marked your centre, a notch at the centre there, and then your marks here, and obviously the pattern's flipped and marked on the other side. Okay, so I'm gonna have to do this the right way up so that I get it the right way round. So it wants us to put one there, and one there. So it wants you to put, this is the top edge of the collar stand here, and it wants you to put the wrong side of your loop to the right side of your fabric. So just like that, I'm going to attach it with some clips, and then we're just going to base those in place, and then we can attach all the collar stand to the collar. There's one there. I got it on lovely before, but it was actually upside down. So I'd attached the these to the inner collar stand. So yeah, managed to get very confused. So this is the outer collar stand is your piece that's not interfaced. Okay, so I'm going to base those in place, and then we'll attach the stand to the collar. So now it wants you to attach your inner collar stand, which is the interfaced piece, to the outside of your collar. So that's the top piece of your collar with your top stitching on, and it's that side. So it's this lower side where you've got the strap loop marked, not this side with the shoulder seam, because that's going to join to the actual coat. Okay, so you want this edge here, marked the centre notch there, so that needs to be right sides together. Just check I've got that the right way round again. Yeah, so strap loop, so it's up that way. Yeah, so centre notch there. Oh, just get... oh yeah, I prefer it easy. I find it easier with clips on these. So. And then join that in to fit. So you need to have a gap. You need to have a centimetre seam allowance at the edge here. Okay, so just make sure you've got that centimetre seam allowance there. And then just I'm going to baste this in place. It does say to pin this side and then pin the other side to it, but I just prefer to baste one piece in place. Just means it's less likely to pucker. So I'm going to baste that in place first, and then we'll attach the outer collar stand. Okay, so that I've basted in place along there. Okay, along the top outer bit there. So that's your top side of your collar. So then we're going to turn it over, and then we're going to attach this. So the side is again the side with the loops there. So that one will line up with the centre there. So that one there. One there. Join this rich. Move it. That one. There. So you'll be able to see the notches on your other side of your collar stand. Just a little bit of curving to ease it in. There we go. And also we'll need to pin it down there because we're going to sew down there. Keeping that out of the way. Okay, so then we're going to sew centimetre seam allowance up there, around the top of the collar, and then down to that side there. And it does suggest in the corners here that you just do one or two stitches just across the corner, because it helps to make a nice sort of point out for the corner. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and then we'll turn the collar out and we can attach it to the coat. Okay, so then you're going to turn that all in the right way, give it a good press down, and then do 2 rows of top stitching around the outer collar edge around there. Okay, so I've done that right. Yeah, around the outer collar edge around there, that's right, yeah. So then it wants you to make your strap, your collar strap. So that's, you're just going to sew around the edges, leaving a gap in the middle, then turn it out, give it a press, and then top stitch around it. And then it doesn't say to, it tells you to do this buttonhole right at the end, but I prefer to do it now while you've got the strap separate, rather than trying to do it when you've got it attached to the coat. Okay, so I sew my buttonhole in there, and then it wants you to attach this to your outer collar. So I want to make sure I've got my buttonhole on the right side. So the buttonhole is on the right hand side. This is the outer collar. The buttonhole needs to be that side. Okay, so let's just get the buttonhole sorted, top stitched. Yeah, so you need to attach that. So it wants you to attach your collar stand just with a line of stitching right in the centre there, right in the centre of the collar, just to hold that in place. So I'm just going to stitch it down the centre there, okay, just a row of stitching just to hold that in place there, and then we're going to fold these over and baste those in place all down like that. Okay, and then we're going to attach it to the coat. Okay, so that's all attached like that. Okay, so that's attached in the centre there, which then you put your belt loop over, so that hides that stitching. So yeah, that's all attached there. So then we're going to attach it to the coat. So we want the centre back here, with the centre back there. I'm going to trim these ends off. The extra belt loop ends off. And those are going to get in the way. So let's trim those off out of the way. Right, then we want the centre back with the centre back, which is there. So you've got your outer collar stand with your strap and everything towards the right side of your coat. You'll have a notch there for your shoulder seam. On the other side, notch there, shoulder seam. So that notch there on the collar joins the shoulder seam. Right between. I've got quite a few layers here to sew through, so depending on what needle you've used, you may need to just change your needle to a slightly stronger, slightly you know, heavier weight needle. Depending on what you've been sewing with, really. I think mine will be all right. So then your collar, the end of your collar stand here joins with the notch on the lapel of the coat there. Okay, so that one will line up with there. And just even it out, and clip or pin in between. Day today here again. Don't moan, we've been waiting for it for ages. So okay, so that's all clipped or pinned in place. So that's your collar, under collar with your strap towards the bottom, towards the right side of your coat. So I'm going to stitch that in place, all at a centimetre seam allowance. No, it just says baste it. Oh, I suppose you stitch it on when we put the facing on. Yeah, so it just says baste that in place. Okay. Yeah, so we're just going to baste that in place because we'll actually stitch it round when we put the facing piece on, I guess, so when we've done the lining and everything. Okay, so I'm going to baste that in place, and then I think it's onto the sleeves next. Yeah, so then it'll be onto the sleeves of the jacket, which I'll do a bit later. Okay. Okay, so I've sewn the sleeve straps. Okay, so they're quite straightforward. Just sew round, turn it in the right way, clip your corners, turn it in the right way, and then to top stitch 2 rows around once you pressed it. Now it doesn't say to do your buttonhole now, but I prefer to do it now just because it's been much easier than trying to sew a buttonhole on the strap when it's attached to your whole coat. So yeah, much easier to do it now. And then you're going to line the strap, you're going to baste the strap in place along the edge of the sleeve seam on your upper sleeve. And that's marked by some notches. So where we've overlocked, I marked mine in a chalk there on the other side, and that's the bit there on your pattern there marked in. Okay, so that's your markings there. So you're going to do that on both sleeves. Let's just get this one lined up. There we go, that's fine. So I'm going to baste those in place on both the sleeves. And then we're going to do the sleeve tab. So these we had left over earlier, we're going to fix those to there. Okay, so I'll go and baste these first. Right, so that's those basted in place. So then we want to get our strap loops, what they're called. sleeve strap loops. So we're going to fold that you had left from when you did your neck loops, the tie on the collar, strap on the collar, so they're the two left from that. So you want to turn under 1 centimetre like that, and then we're just going to position that. So I've marked the position on your, has it on your pattern, so it's whichever cross it is on here according to your size. So you want to mark both of those on your fabric. So then we're going to line that up there like that. So that's that one in place. And do the same with that one there. I'm going to line the bottom one up first. It's worth, just once you've got it lined up, just checking that your strap is going to come over properly. So we're going to stitch along that edge there. So you can do it with a normal stitch going back and forth just to secure it, or you can do a bar tack. I'm probably going to do a bar tack on these. And then when we've done the bottom one, we're also going to turn under. You can trim them down if necessary, but I probably won't need to trim mine. I think if I turn under another centimetre, that'll be about right. To put those in place there, and then that will go underneath. I'll pin that on there, so I'll take that off. I'll show you in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to do those, bar tack those in place, and then I can assemble, I'll show you that, and then I can assemble the sleeve together, inset the sleeve, and then we'll sort the facing. Right, so to sew the belt loops, you're just going to overlock one edge, fold it in, and then fold it over, much the same as you've done the other collar loops and the strap loops for the sleeves, so exactly the same as that, but they are slightly wider. So then you're going to top stitch down each side, cut the one, it will come out as one piece, and you're just going to trim that in half, and then you're going to sew your belt loops onto your side seam, where you've got the side seam of your jacket here, of your coat here. Okay, so it's worth trying it on at this point and just finding out where you want, where you want the belt to sit, where you want your belt to sit on your waist. So I've just put a pin to mark the lower edge of where I want the belt to sit, and so just put a pin there to mark that. So then I'm just going to pin that in place along there. Actually, I'm going to leave that one in there and pin it that way. Want to pin upside down. There we go. So I'm going to bar tack across there. So it wanted you to turn 1 centimetre under each end of the belt loop, and then just bar tack across the top of each on that side seam. So I'm going to sew this one, and then I'm going to measure the other one to see how far down it is, and then fit them so to make sure that they're symmetrical. Okay, and then I'll sew the sleeve up, set in the sleeve, and then the next bit we'll do will be the facing. Okay, so I've set in my sleeves, and I did, before I put my sleeves, attach my sleeves to the jacket, I did turn it up the 4 centimetres for the hem allowance, which it tells you to do later on, but it's easier to press the sleeve when it's not all attached to the coat. So I just pressed that ready now, then attached my sleeves. So then, and I've also gone ahead, made my belt, which is quite straightforward, just one long belt top stitched round, and I've also made the lining so that I can continue to show you the facing, attaching the lining and bagging it out. So next is the facing piece. So you've got your front facing, which is this one here, so that's piece 12. Okay, got that one there, and then you've got your back facing, which is piece 18, and then you're just going to attach those. Let's turn it all the right way round. So you're just going to attach those, seam those at the shoulder seams, what effectively is the shoulder seams there. Okay, and press those seams open, and then we're going to attach it to the jacket. So the first thing to do, I have to get this, I might just raise the camera so you can get it all on shot a bit better. just lay the coat out like that. That's going to be the best way to do it. The top bit in focus. Right, so I want you to right sides together. Line your facing up like this along the jacket, then that bit will go round the collar edge in a moment. But the first bit it wants you to do is to do the hem. So the first bit it wants you to do is to join it together at the hem along here. So matching those ends. Like so, at the end of your jacket like that. Okay, and do the same on the other side. Now it wants you to stitch from this edge here, the outside edge, to the inner edge where your facing edge is. It wants you to stitch your centimetre seam allowance along to there, but finish a centimetre before the end there, centimetre before this inner edge of your facing. Okay, because that you're going to need that edge to attach your lining to, so that's going to want to fold. Okay, and you're going to need that. So it wants you to stitch along there to a centimetre before the end there. So I'll do that, and then I'll show you how we'll then turn it up and then make the hem like so. Okay. Okay, so when you've stitched that them together at the bottom there, you're going to press your seam allowance up towards the facing, and then you're going to turn up your 4 centimetre hem at the bottom here. So just make sure you've got that 4 centimetre hem all the way along the end there. Okay, and then you're going to line up your facing along and around the top. So you just need to get that difficult to show you on video, it's not big enough. So make sure the ends of your facing match up with your lapel there. Okay, and then make sure your shoulder seam, you've got a lot of fabric here, so you might need to increase your needle size or something depending on what you're sewing with, because you've got a lot of layers to go through there. You've got your inner, you've got your collar, you've got your facing, and you've got your cape bit as well. So depending on what fabric you've used, I think there's a twill, I should be all right, but it depends what fabric you've used really and how thick it is. So I'm going to put a clip in there, and then you're just going to pin all the way around, matching your neck edge facing around there and back in the neck. Or just to say, if you wanted to put a label in, then it's better to do it now before you attach your collar. You can, I prefer to attach mine flat to the back facing bit there, but you can just catch it into the collar edge, or you could catch it in here between the lining and the facing. So we're just going to line that bit up at the back there, clip on that one. So sometimes I find the clips useful if you've got lots and lots of layers. All together. Excuse the rustling. Okay, so that's that pin around there. So I'm going to line that up around the collar edge as well, and then just pin that all the way down the facing edge as I've done with that side there. Okay, so from there all the way up, round there, round the neckline and down the other side. So we're going to stitch that round with a centimetre seam allowance, then grade and trim the corners, grade the seams, trim the corners, turn it all in the right way, give it a really good press, and then we're going to top stitch around that edge. Okay, and then we can attach the lining to the inside. Okay. Okay, so that's all top stitched around down from the hem up along and round to the lapel, and it just wants you to top stitch round to where the collar top stitching finishes there. So That's what I've done there. Okay, and next it says about shoulder pads. Now I didn't want anything too big as a shoulder pad, but looking at the jacket, it does benefit from a little bit of support, and on the shoulder pad there, definitely it just gives it a better shape. So I prefer to use these tailored shoulder pads here. I've just taken some of the layers off and also trimmed it down because it was too wide. You just need it from the edge of this edge wants to sit along the around the shoulder. I'll show you in a minute, and then the other bit's this bit towards your neckline, and this was way too wide for me, so I trimmed it down there. And then I've also taken off some of the layers, so I've just got a nice thin shoulder pad there, but it just gives that little bit of structure and support. So to fix it in, it does give quite good directions on the instructions. So you'll usually have a marking on your shoulder pad where the shoulder bit is, and predominantly the wider bit usually goes down towards the front and the shorter bit towards the back. So that will just sit up like that towards the neck and then sit on there on the shoulder. So I'll pin that in place and then show you how I've stitched it in the other one. So you'll pin that there, and then that where that notch is will sit towards the shoulder, towards the neckline rather. And then when you shape it, when you stitch it in, you're going to just attach it to your seam allowance of your arm side of the armhole there that you've done. But you don't want to stitch it like that. What you want to do is to turn it in that way, and you want to shape it around. So you want to, how can I show you this? Oh, how can I show you? So you want it to shape around the way that it's naturally your shoulder's going to go. So you want to shape it around that way, okay? And you're going to just fix it to the seam allowance. So you're just going to stitch that edge, just in a running stitch is fine, just attaching that just to the seam allowance of your shoulder there, okay? And also just catch it to the seam allowances near the neckline there, okay? So that's secured that in place, and then fold it out, and it just gives it a little bit of structure and support, which is nice in a coat sometimes, and particularly a trench coat like this. So yeah, it just makes the shoulder sit a bit better. I looked at it without because I'm not always a big fan of shoulder pads, but sometimes it does benefit from it, and this definitely does benefit. So I'm going to stitch this other one in, and then as I say, I've done the lining already, so then we'll attach the lining next and do the hem and bag it out. Okay, so then you're going to attach your lining to your coat. So you want right sides together. See if I can lay this out and make it look more like sense. So you're going to want right sides together. Okay, so the right side of your lining to the right side of your jacket, your coat rather. So this end here at the hem, you want to attach where you've got the little corner there. You need to attach that to that end there. Buried my pins now. Attach that there. Lots of fluff on my shoulder pads. Notch somewhere up here. I've lost mine. Right, and then join your shoulder here, your shoulder of your lining with the shoulder of your facing. So you're attaching the actually attaching the lining to the facing piece that you've just sewn on. Now around the neck facing here, I did have quite a bit of easing to get in. I think I probably stretched my linings, of viscose lining, so I think it's probably stretched a bit. I did overlock the edges because it was just fraying everywhere, so I probably stretched it a bit in doing that, so I'm just going to ease that in. Pins, so do it in half. So if you've got easing in, just have it like that, pin it in the middle, and then pin it in the middle of those two pins again, just evening out that ease. So there, so you've got that bit there, you just bend it like that, even out the ease to the middle. And you can usually ease it in. There we go. Okay, so then we're going to do down the other side, so down this long side here. Pin down this front edge a bit first, I think. And you leave a gap in one of these, leave a gap in the seam, in one of these seams, one side, of sewing this to a lapel, because that will be used at a later date to bag out. So you make sure you need to leave a gap. I don't know if it says how much of a gap. Oh, 15 centimetres, 6 inches. Okay, so that's quite a bit in one side. I suppose there's quite a bit of coat to turn through, isn't there? So get it stuck. Right, so curve there. Right, okay, so then you're just going to sort of even it out in between. Like so. And I'm going to pin all that in place along there. So I'm going to stitch all the way around, and I'm just going to leave a 6-inch gap, 15 centimetre 6-inch gap somewhere here along the lapel, along the seam, the lining to facing seam, so about like that. And a little bit more than that actually. Yeah, about like that. So I'm going to pin all that in place and stitch that round, centimetre seam allowance, and then I am going to, it wants you to press your facing towards your lining, the seam towards the lining, so then I am going to just quite tightly in, just under stitch that round, just so it sits nice and neatly inside. It doesn't ask you to do that, but I'm going to do that on mine. I'll show you when I've done it. And then next we're going to do the sleeves. Okay, so we've got fluff on, right, so we've got the coat lining turned into the right way, so into wrong sides out. So you've got one sleeve here, the sleeve lining here, and the sleeve coat sleeve here. So you just need to push your sleeve lining into your sleeve, all right, so it comes out at the end here, all right, and then just make sure that that's lined up. So you want the underarm seam on the underarm, yep, that down there. So then you just want to make sure that you've got the right seam lining up with the correct seam there, which I can't find at the moment. I think it's that one. Let's just check that's right. So just feel down the sleeve. Yeah, so you just want to check you've got that underarm sleeve lining up with the, you just check your sleeve seams are lining up with the right ones, and just pin that in place. You just need to hold it so that that's roughly in the right place. So you've got your edges, you've just pulled your lining through and made sure that those sleeve linings are lining up. Okay, so then you're gonna I'm going to show you, there's not enough room on this video. So then you're going to go up the hem of your jacket, of your coat rather, and then pull that sleeve through to the wrong side, out to the outside. So you're just going to pull it all through like that, and then pull the lining and the sleeve out. Give it a little tug, just gently pull that out. Okay, so then you'll know. So these are the seams I've got lined up. Okay, now I want to put those right sides together. So I'm going to fold that bit back a minute, like that. Okay, and then I'm going to attach this round. So I want this seam here. I'm going to keep hold of that seam. That's the one I want to line up with their, hang on, I've got to think now, right sides together. So that way round. Okay, so then, and then you folded this bit back of your jacket, and then you're just going to fold your sleeve piece, just lay your sleeve piece over the top. Okay, so you've got right sides together, so your inside is the right side of your sleeve there, folded against that hem of the sleeve. So then pin the other seams matching up the other side. Just pin it around a little bit in between. This lining really wants to fray, which is why I overlocked the rest of it, but I didn't do the sleeves. So I knew I'd be joining them like this, but maybe I should have done. Right, so, okay, so that's pinned in place like that. Okay, so that's your hem on your sleeve, and that's your lining attached like so. All right, so now we're going to go and sew centimetre seam allowance just around this edge here, not to the coat at all, just these two seams together. All right, and then it says to hand stitch the end of the cuff in place. I just stitch it, attach it at the seam allowances to hold it up, which I find is enough. So I'll show you how I do that. And I also tether the sleeve to the lining, which I've done in other coats, but it doesn't say to do in this, but I'll show you how I do that as well. Okay. Sorry, it's very hard to visualise, isn't it, when it's all jumbled up like this. That's your sleeve seam stitched around there at the cuff. All right, so just those, your lining and your sleeve seam together. So then where you've pre-folded it and pressed it, you can quite easily see how that folds up. So then, once you get that nice and flat, then I'm just going to stitch this to the seam allowance. So just stitch in the seam allowance of the cuff to the seam allowance of the sleeve seam there. So just stitch it in a few places. I'll just stitch it over the other seam allowance on the other side. Doesn't have to be overly neat or anything like that, because it's all going to be inside. So you just need to see that you've secured that nice and firmly. There we go. Snip the end off there. And then we're going to do the same thing with the other seam allowance. So there. Seam allowance of the sleeve, and there. And the cuff. Seam allowance and the cuff. You can see, okay. So it's just this bit of the seam allowance here to this seam allowance there of the cuff that I'm just attaching together, and that way you don't see any visible stitching or anything I find that's quite enough to hold my sleeve cuff up. It's pressed well as well, so yeah, I'm quite happy with that. That's often what I'll do on a coat, and often what's instructed. But I think the pattern does say to hand stitch it all the way around, so you could do that if you wanted to. I feel this will be adequate, so got to twist that. There we go. Okay, so that's attached now at the cuff, so that seam, and that should be enough to hold that cuff upright. So then I want to line up the two sleeves. So I'm going to pull that through slightly to make sure that's all lined up before I attach that there. So I'm just going to get this sleeve here. I'm just taking the sleeve, pulling that through to the right side, which should bring the lining through with it. Okay, like so. So just check that's all straight before I go any further. Yes, that seems fine. Yeah, lovely. So I'm just going to tuck up the lining of the coat to expose the two underarm seams here. Now I've lost my needle. Good. Ah, there it is. Got it. So then I'm just going to catch a little bit of the underarm seam with my coat. This is just to, sometimes they just to tether the lining to the coat. So just catch a couple of stitches in that seam allowance of the underarm, and then a couple of stitches to the underarm of that, but I'm leaving this thread here. See that thread I've got there in between? So I'm going to leave that there just to just a couple of centimetres or so, and then double stitch there, and then just go back to the other side, do a couple of stitches in there, just keeping that tethered bit there, and back to this side, a couple of stitches there, just keeping that tethered bit there. You can then do like a blanket stitch thing around the tethered stitching if you want to, but I feel that's adequate enough, so I'm quite happy with that. Okay, so that just helps to tether your lining there to your sleeve, so it doesn't move about so much inside your coat. Okay, so that's all that done. So next we're going to do the vent next. Okay, so we need to press up 4 centimetres of hem all the way around over to the wrong side. Yeah, so I'm going to go and press all that up first, and then we're going to turn it in the wrong way again and attach that lining. Okay, so I'll go and press this up first. I've pressed up the hem around on both sides. Okay, so then it wants you to turn it all inside out again. Like so. Yeah, so it does say on the right hand side you align the vent edges, but mine seems to be the other way around. I must have cut my lining wrong, or got the right side and wrong side of my lining muddled up, because it looks very much the same both sides. So, and your lining pieces are different each side for the vent, so you trim one piece. So I'm just going to have my vent go in the opposite way. I can't redo all the lining now. Ooh. So I'm going to pin that in place. And basically my vent will just be going the other way, so it really won't matter. I won't be bothered about it. So that is that. Line this up along here. The cat's come to join me. She's sitting on the ironing board. Not very helpful, but she's lovely. So she gets away with it because she's lovely. Right, so you can't see that, can you? So, as I say, I've got mine the opposite way round. So this is going to be, this is the left, which I'm lining up. But if you've done it correct and your lining's the right way round, then you will be joining the edges on the right. So it says here, align the corners of the shell. Yeah. So I've just got mine the wrong way round, which I think is because I've got confused with the right and wrong side of my lining. It's very similar on both sides. So that's that side. And then the other side, you're going to want to line that up with the vent notch, which is, lost that now, there it is. There, so your centimetre seam allowance lining up with that vent notch. Centimetre seam allowance of your lining lining up with the vent notch there. Okay, so the opposite side, one side, this should be your right side, will be lined up right to the edge, and then your left side will be lined up to that. You've got a notch there, your vent notch marked on your pattern, and that's where you want to line your lining up to. So yeah, you see that fits that side then. So that's fine. I'll just have my vent going the other way. So I'm going to pin all that in place, stitch along there, both of those, and then we'll do the corners for the vent. Okay. So then on the vent, I've sewn along the bottom of the hem there. So then on the vent, it wants you to turn up the hem to the wrong side, your 4 centimetre hem allowance, and then attach the lining right to the edge of that vent. So that would be your, normally be your right vent, and then on your left vent, you've got a notch here, vent notch there in your lining, and then you want to join the notch on your lining at the end of your lining up with that notch there. So that's your centimetre seam allowance on your lining with that there. Okay, and then join it up at the top, which I should probably do in a minute actually, because it's difficult to do and I've got the other side pinned. Let's just pin that in place along there. I'll pin that tightly at the top once I've sewn the other side. So I'll show you what it looks like. Yeah, and then pin it at the top there. So that's your left vent. So your seam allowance there lines up with that vent notch at the bottom there. So it looks like that. So it looks a bit strange at the moment. Okay, but then that's all going to turn over to make the vent. So I'm going to stitch that. I'll stitch the other vent, and then I think I need to hand sew the shell, the hem, for the turned up seam allowance. And then we turn the garment all in the right side out. Okay, so I'll probably seam these now, and then I'll show you what we've done. And then I'll have to go in and hand stitch the hem. Okay. So that's the vents sewn. Okay, so you're just sewing it down to there. Okay, and that's that side sewn right down to the ends there. So then it's going to want us to stitch our hem. Yeah, so you're going to hand sew the hem before you turn it right side out. So you're just going to have to feel where you've got that folded edge. A couple of pins in there. And then so just hand stitch that hem with that hem folded up like that. Okay, you want your hem folded up where it's going to be, and then hand stitch that in place. It's a bit of a shame because we haven't got this turned out yet, but we can get some idea of where that will be. Yeah, you could turn it out, press it, and then turn it back in the other way. I might even do that to make sure I've got it all lined up correctly at the corner before I hand stitch it. So I'm going to do that, hand stitch it all, then we'll just pull it all through the gap in the lining, and then tomorrow it's just the attaching the vent down and then sewing the buttonholes and the buttons. Okay. So that's the jacket hem all sewn by hand and pressed up. So you just bag it out through this gap here. Turns out really easily. So now I just need to hand stitch that edge down along there, and I need to hand stitch the vent part here. So this bit here, I just need to hand stitch, tuck that in a bit better there, and hand stitch down there to hold this vent in place there. Then you just need to check that you're they're at the correct level, okay, that they are level along the, sorry, I need to hand stitch that bit, just tuck that in a bit more, I'll do that a bit better in a minute, and hand stitch along there. And then you just need to check that your vent ends are level at the end there. Then just roughly pin your lining out of the way for the vent, because now we're going to stitch this vent down in place from the outside. So you just want to make sure you have your linings all, you know, kept flat away, that it's not all puckered up where you're going to sew under there. And then turn it over, just give it a press here to make sure that that's all sat correct, and then you're just going to stitch from the just above the top of here where your vent edge finishes down to the edge of where your vent is there. So just at an angle across there, just to secure that vent piece in place. Okay, so I'll do that, show you what I've done there, and then I'll do the buttonholes, and then I'll probably show you it on a mannequin first of all, so I can show you all the details and the button placement and buttonholes, because it's only actually 6 if you're doing all the buttons, but I had to shorten mine quite a lot, so I've just got 5. So it's just these on the front edge. Oh no, 5, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just check the measurements of those. Actually, yeah, I might just check the measurements of those because I did adjust mine, so they might be off a bit. But yeah, 5 buttonholes down the bottom there, and then the rest are all buttons. These are just mock buttons, they don't have the buttonholes, and then these 5 attached to the 5 on the other side, and then you've got your small buttons to attach to your collar. I did my buttonholes earlier on my collar stand and my cuffs, so I'll go and stitch the vent now, do that bit of hand stitching, and sew the buttonholes,